Chapter 14, the respiratory system. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the structures of the respiratory system, the mechanism of breathing, the transport of gases between lungs and cells, and then the respiratory centers of the brain, and finally, respiratory disorders. Starting off with the structures of the respiratory system. Before we go into the structures, I just want a quick reminder of what is the function of the respiratory system. So, give me a moment. Why do we have the respiratory system? What is its purpose? Ultimately, its purpose is to get us oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. But why? Why do we need oxygen? What primary function of cells what primary mechanism do cells perform that requires oxygen? That would be ATP. Ultimately, the goal of the respiratory system is to provide the body with ATP, so the cells, or provide the body with oxygen, so cells have oxygen, and for oxygen, oxygen is going to be used for that ATP production. So the whole goal is to provide the body with essential oxygen, which is needed to extract energy from food. And so we're going to exhale carbon dioxide, a waste product of cellular respiration that helps also regulate the acid-base balance of body fluids. So the process of respiration is breathing oxygen in, transfer the oxygen to our red blood cells. The red blood cells carry the body to cells. The red blood cells drop off oxygen. In order to breathe out, or that's breathing in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide. The blood is going to pick up carbon dioxide from those body cells. The blood is going to carry that carbon dioxide back to the lungs, and we're going to breathe out carbon dioxide. This right here, these 2 bullet points, it's going to summarize everything we're going to learn in this chapter. It's going to be, the purpose of the respiratory system. Oh, these gases are going to move in and out via simple diffusion. Does anybody remember what simple diffusion is? Is it passive or active transport? Does it require energy in order for it to progress? And are we moving from areas of high concentration to low concentration, or low concentration to high concentration? Please make sure that you are writing down the answers to those questions in your notes, just to help you remind you of what we've been learning through the semester. So here's a diagram that's going to kind of summarize the process of breathing. And I think this diagram explains itself. So spend a little bit of time looking at it. I'm going to move on though. So for structures in the respiratory system, we're going to go through sort of the path of air in the body. We're going to start with our nose or our mouth. We're going to breathe in past our nasal cavity, in through our pharynx, down our larynx, into the trachea, from the trachea into the bronchial tree, and then once we're in the bronchial tree, we'll go to the alveoli in the lungs. Once we're in the alveoli in the lungs, we can then pass oxygen and carbon dioxide back and forth through simple diffusion. Here's the diagram, figure 14.2, that's going to break down all of the structures in the upper respiratory system and the lower respiratory system. I'm going to give you a chance to just sort of look through this on your own. Our next couple of slides are going to break down each one of these parts in greater depth, so it may be handy to keep this image nearby. So if you have your textbooks handy, hold open to figure 14.2 as we move into some of these other as we move into each one of these areas more specifically. Starting off with the upper respiratory system. Its structure or its function, its structure is going to be large air-filled spaces in the bones of the face. This is what connects the nasal cavities. And its primary function is going to be to helps lighten the head. Our head is not quite so heavy because a lot of these bones are hollow with these cavities. But it's also going to warm and moisten the air. It's part of the resonating chamber that's going to affect our voice. An example of a homeostatic imbalance of this region might be sinusitis, which is the inflammation of the mucosal membranes of the sinuses. Moving on to the pharynx and the larynx. The part of structures of the upper respiratory system, the nose and the nasal cavity. Moving on to the pharynx. The pharynx is going to be the throat. This is the space behind the nose and mouth, and it's going to be a passageway for food, drink, and air. It's going to also be connected to the middle ear via, does anybody remember what connects the middle ear to the back of your throat? Yes, it's the auditory tubes or the eustachian tubes. And what is the role of this, or what is the significance of the eustachian tube? So write that down, comment in the notes below, or let me know what is the role of the eustachian tube and why does it connect to the throat. After the pharynx, we move into the larynx. The larynx is going to be a selective entrance to the lower respiratory system. During swallowing, larynx is going to rise up and cause the epiglottis, that's a flap of cartilage at the back of your throat, to cover the glottis. That's the opening of the larynx through which air passes. If this mechanism fails and food or drink accidentally enter the trachea, then you're going to cough. You're going to cough to help expel the material. If it goes down far enough, it may actually block your airway completely, causing choking. You may have to use the Heimlich maneuver to actually force the item back out of your larynx, out of your throat. The larynx is also going to be the source of voice. Vocal cords are going to be two thick strands of tissue covering the glottis. They're going to vibrate to produce the voice. Tension in the vocal cords determines pitch. If they're stretched and thin cords, you'll get higher pitched. Relaxed cords will give a lower pitch. Laryngitis is an example of a homeostatic imbalance here. Laryngitis is going to be inflammation of the larynx. Vocal cords are going to become swollen and thick. It's going to cause the voice to deepen and make it very difficult to speak. Here is some diagrams of this upper pathway of the respiratory system. We have the cilia here, found in the lower branches of the of your throat. These are going to help keep the airways free of debris, and so this is just what they look like. Moving down into the lower respiratory system, we're going to see the trachea. The trachea is the windpipe and the bronchial tree. This is the primary function of this region is going to move air to gas exchange surfaces and then perform that gas exchange. Starting off with our trachea, the windpipe. This is going to be held open by C-shaped rings of cartilage. This prevents the airways from collapsing, and it helps conduct air between the environment and your lungs. Your bronchial tree is going to be a network of progressively smaller air tubes. The trachea divides into two air tubes called the primary bronchi, each of which leads to a lung. The bronchi will branch repeatedly within each lung, eventually forming bronchioles. The bronchioles will terminate in alveoli, which will be the sacs, or the space for gas exchange. The bronchi are held open by cartilage, and the amount of cartilage will decrease as the tubes get smaller, obviously. Bronchioles are going to lack cartilage, but they will have smooth muscle around them. Asthma is a homeostatic imbalance caused by spasms of the bronchial muscles that are going to ultimately restrict airflow. It's typically characterized by recurring attacks of wheezing and difficulty breathing and persistent inflammation of the airways. It might be caused by allergies, respiratory infections, and exercise. Many things can bring asthma attacks on. Inhalants may be prescribed to relax the bronchial muscles or to reduce inflammation of the air tubules, making breathing a little bit easier. So once we go from the bronchial tree, we're going to branch down into the lungs. In the lungs, we're going to find alveoli. These are going to be tiny little sacs where oxygen diffuses from the air inhaled into the blood. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveolar air to be exhaled. On the surface of the alveoli is going to be phospholipid molecules that coat the alveoli and help keep them open. This is what's known as surfactant. Respiratory distress syndrome, RDS, occurs in some premature babies due to insufficient production of that surfactant. Here is a close-up of what that bronchiole looks like. Here's the bronchiole coming out into alveoli. These alveoli are covered in capillaries, venules, and arterioles to help promote that gas exchange between the blood and the lungs. Table 14.1 is going to be a great study tool to help summarize each of those structures of the upper respiratory and the lower respiratory system that we talked about. So spend a little bit of time with this diagram, use it to make flashcards or study notes or whatever it is that you find best to help study and understanding. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions.